The brain, an organ that weighs so little yet controls everything we do. It's what allows us to think, feel, decide, and remember. And even after thousands of years of study, we still don't fully understand it. What makes us who we are? How can this soft, fragile mass of tissue create thoughts, emotions, and even consciousness itself? If you could hold your brain in your hands, you'd probably be surprised, maybe even disappointed. It doesn't look like the command center of human life. Just a gray, folded mass, the texture of pudding, unable to even hold itself together. Yet inside that strange structure lies your entire self. Every memory, every emotion, every dream, fear, and idea. Every story you tell about who you are lives inside that intricate network of cells. The human brain weighs barely 1.5 kilos, about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes nearly 1/5 of all the energy you produce. Every single second, millions of electrical impulses surge through it. If you could somehow hear them, they'd sound like a storm, like thousands of tiny lightning bolts flashing from one neuron to another. Because that's what a thought really is. A spark of electricity leaping across a web of synapses. Each neuron works like a tiny transmitter, but when you connect 86 billion of them, you get something more complex than any computer humanity has ever built. In fact, intelligence isn't about how many neurons you have, but about how they connect, how they communicate. It's like a city. What matters most isn't the number of buildings, but the roads, bridges, and intersections that link them into one living organism. The brain itself isn't one uniform whole. It's the result of millions of years of evolution, built layer by layer, like floors in an ancient building. The oldest parts, the ones we share with reptiles, handle the basics: breathing, heartbeat, and the instinct to fight or flee. Those primal systems act before we can even think. When something startles you, you jump before realizing why. On top of that ancient foundation came new structures, those responsible for emotion, pleasure, and memory. And crowning it all is the cerebral cortex, a thin layer of tissue that allows us to think abstractly, to plan, create art, and even reflect on ourselves. That's where consciousness lives. But here's the strange part. The brain itself has no contact with the world. Locked in a dark skull, sealed away from everything outside, it relies completely on the information fed to it by the senses. Eyes, ears, skin, nose, tongue, they are its antennas, its windows to reality. Yet what reaches the brain isn't a picture, a sound, or a smell in any familiar form. It's just raw electrical data. It's the brain that creates the world you see and feel. When you look at a tree, your eyes aren't really seeing the tree. They're detecting waves of light reflected off its leaves. Your brain takes those signals, compares them to memories, and declares, "Ah, that's a tree." You see what you know. If you'd never seen a cat before, your brain wouldn't understand what's staring back at you from the windowsill. And that's why we sometimes see things that aren't really there. A face in the clouds, a figure in the shadows, a pattern in smoke. The brain hates emptiness. It would rather make a mistake than admit it doesn't understand something. Your senses are its spies, but every one of them lies in its own way. Hearing deceives you, because sound is nothing more than vibrations in the air. Taste changes when you block your nose, because smell plays a far bigger role than most people realize. The world you think you know isn't the world as it is. It's your brain's interpretation of raw data. Two people can look at the same thing and see something completely different. One hears sadness in a song. Another hears hope. The brain isn't a camera or a microphone. It's a storyteller, a painter, a director. From the fragments it receives, it builds a story. And every living being has its own version of that story. For centuries, scientists have tried to understand how something as simple as an electric spark can give rise to something as vast as emotions, memories, dreams, and consciousness. But before diving into those mysteries, it's worth remembering this. The brain isn't just a thinking organ. It's a feeling one. Every note of joy, every shadow of fear, every spark of curiosity is born there. And it all begins with one flicker. A microscopic pulse of electricity, traveling through a network of neurons like a message moving through a cosmic web. Emotions are like the weather inside our minds, changing. Unpredictable, sometimes calm, sometimes violent. You can't switch them off, even though many have tried. One moment you're calm, the next your heart races, your hands tremble, and the world around you seems to blur. That's not magic, it's chemistry and electricity. It all starts deep inside the brain, in a structure known as the limbic system, an emotional command center that existed long before humans could speak, write, or dream. This is where fear, anger, joy, and desire live. This is where instinct hides. When you feel anger or fear, it's not because you decided to. It's because your amygdala, a tiny almond-shaped structure, has pulled the alarm. It decides something is dangerous before you've even had time to think. That's why emotions are faster than thoughts. The brain reacts first. It explains later. Fear appears in a fraction of a second. Reason catches up afterwards, trying to make sense of what happened. It's an evolutionary trick. Survival before reflection. If our ancestors had stopped to analyze whether that roar in the dark was a tiger or just the wind, they wouldn't have lasted long. But emotions aren't our enemies. They're what give color to life. Without them, existence would be nothing more than a chain of logical choices. Efficient perhaps, but empty. Imagine watching a movie with no music, no tone, no emotion on the actors' faces. Everything functions, but nothing moves you. That's what a world without emotions would feel like. Scientists often describe emotions as the brain's road signs, guiding us toward rewards and warning us away from danger. Somewhere in that delicate balance lies consciousness itself, because emotions alone are just chemical reactions. But when the brain begins to notice them, to name them, to understand them, that's when the self appears. Consciousness isn't a single place in the brain. It's a process, a dialogue between its emotional core and its rational cortex. It's as if two narrators lived within us, one who feels and another who tells the story. Sometimes, though, the narrator and the actor fall out of sync. The brain can feel something it doesn't understand, or understand something it doesn't feel. That's why people can cry from happiness or laugh in moments of tragedy. Consciousness isn't a calculator of emotion. It's a stage where every feeling performs at once. Passion, shame, euphoria, nostalgia. And we try to keep it all under control. But what is control, really? Do we decide our emotions, or do they decide for us? Scientists have debated that for years. Experiments show that the brain begins to make decisions fractions of a second before we become aware of them. Before you say yes or no, your neurons already know what you'll do. Consciousness comes later, like a narrator trying to give meaning to a story that's already been written. It's as if you are watching a movie of your own life, convinced you're directing it, while the script has long been finished. And yet, here lies the beautiful paradox of being human. Even though so much of what we do is driven by biology and chemistry, we still have the power to pause, to think, to choose differently. That's what makes us unique. We can feel anger and still choose peace. We can be afraid and still move forward. This ability, the awareness of emotion, is what makes us truly free. Consciousness is also our ability for introspection, to look within ourselves and ask questions that have no simple answers. Who am I? Why do I feel what I feel? How do I know that I exist? These are the questions the brain asks about itself. And in that sense, it is the most extraordinary form of intelligence we know. Because here is a piece of matter, born from stardust billions of years ago, that has begun to wonder about its own existence. Perhaps consciousness isn't something we have, but something we do. Constantly, every second, we recreate ourselves over and over again, like a story that never ends. And though we still cannot fully understand it, we sense that somewhere within this mystery lies meaning. Perhaps even what we call the soul. When you fall asleep, it seems as though everything ends. Your body becomes still, your breathing slows, and the outside world disappears. But inside your head, the real spectacle is just beginning. Instead of resting, the brain switches into another mode, wilder, more unpredictable, filled with visions and emotions. Sleep is not a state of rest, it's a state of altered consciousness. During the night, your brain passes through several stages of sleep that repeat like musical cycles. deeper and calmer each time, until suddenly, in the middle of the silence, everything lights up. That's the REM phase, paradoxical sleep. Your eyes dart rapidly beneath your eyelids. Your heart speeds up, and your brain activity begins to resemble wakefulness. The body sleeps, but the mind is fully awake, only in another world. It's during this phase that we dream most vividly. Images, sounds, feelings, memories, and fears swirl together in a kaleidoscope we cannot control. Deprived of external stimuli, the brain begins to create its own reality. It's like an artist locked in a dark room, drawing on the walls scenes from the past, fantasies, and sometimes their deepest fears. Scientists still don't know exactly why we dream, but they have a few ideas. One theory suggests that dreams are how the brain organizes memories, deciding what to keep and what to discard. It's a kind of nightly cleanup of the system. Another theory says that dreams are a reality simulator, a safe environment for rehearsal. We can feel fear, fight, run without real danger. The brain practices, learns, and analyzes. Dreams become a kind of survival training. But some dreams defy logic, prophetic, recurring, lucid ones. In dreams, we can fly, speak with the dead, travel to places that never existed. What's fascinating is that the brain doesn't distinguish between fiction and reality. The same regions activate as when we actually see or feel something. To the brain, a dream isn't pretending, it's a real experience. Lucid dreaming, the state in which you become aware that you're dreaming and can take control of the plot, is proof of how astonishingly flexible the mind is. In that moment, consciousness and the subconscious meet at the edge of reality. You know you're dreaming, yet you can shape the dream itself. The human brain becomes not just an observer, but a creator. It's the moment when you can fly without wings, talk to your memories, and live what's impossible when awake. But dreams can also terrify. Nightmares are echoes of emotions we can't face in waking life. Fear, shame, grief, all return at night, disguised in symbols. The brain doesn't show you a monster under the bed because it wants to scare you. It shows you the fear that lives within you. A nightmare is its way of speaking, sometimes brutal, but honest. The strangest thing is that dream and reality differ less than we think. In both, your brain creates images, emotions, and a narrative. The only difference is that during wakefulness, data comes from outside, while in dreams, from within. You could say that every night you step into a private film, directed by yourself. Sometimes dreams seem prophetic, not because they predict the future, but because the brain can analyze more than we consciously realize. By gathering subtle signals, emotions, and intuitions, it can show you in a dream something you already know, though you don't yet understand it. It's not magic, it's the depth of perception. Many cultures believed dreams were messages from the gods. Others thought they were journeys of the soul. And perhaps there's a trace of truth in both. Because isn't it divine in a way that a fragment of matter that once was stardust can create entire worlds out of nothing each night? After all, when you dream, you draw from no external sources. Everything you see, feel, hear is born within you. Every face, every voice, every scene. Your brain is the greatest set designer in the universe. And in the morning, when you wake, most of it vanishes. Only traces remain. Fleeting emotions, images that dissolve in the first light of day. As if the brain quietly closed the door to another dimension and whispered, "This isn't your reality. Not yet." But maybe it's precisely there, in that silent space between dream and wakefulness, that our best ideas are born. Because what seems impossible in daylight becomes obvious in dreams. Many great discoveries began there, in the realm of dreams. The chemist Auguste Kekule saw in his dream a snake biting its own tail, and thus understood the ring structure of benzene. Paul McCartney heard the melody of Yesterday in a dream. Elias Howe, inventor of the sewing machine, dreamed of spears with holes near their tips, and upon waking, found the missing piece of his mechanism. So sleep isn't an escape from reality. It's its laboratory. There, in the silence of night, the brain studies itself, tests the limits of imagination, repairs emotions, and organizes memories. Every night you go through a small death of consciousness, and its rebirth. You awaken renewed, as if someone had untangled the millions of wires that knotted in your head during the day. And when you open your eyes, reality returns slowly. The images of dreams fade, as if they never were. But the brain remembers, not in pictures, but in the emotions that linger. That's why you sometimes wake up calm and other times uneasy, even if you don't know why. Because a dream is a message understood only by the one who sent it. Everything begins with an impulse. In the first weeks after conception, tiny clusters of nerve cells begin to form in the embryo. At first, there are only a few thousand, but with every passing day, their number skyrockets, up to 500,000 new neurons per minute. It's a true biological explosion, from which a future universe of thoughts will be born. When we come into the world, our brains already contain nearly all the neurons we will ever have, but few connections between them. It's like a city full of houses, with roads only beginning to be built. A baby looks at the world with wide open eyes, absorbing every sound, scent, and touch. And from these experiences, the brain builds a map of reality. Every smile, every word, every beam of light is a signal carving new neural pathways. A child's brain is a master of learning. In the first years of life, it's so plastic it learns at a speed an adult could only dream of. That's why a child can so quickly acquire language, recognize faces, understand emotions. Inside their head, something extraordinary happens. Billions of connections are formed and erased every day. The brain tests combinations like an experiment, deciding which pathways to keep and which to prune. Around the age of 10 comes what might be called the great cleanup. The brain starts to remove unused connections, keeping only what's essential. This process, synaptic pruning, is like a gardener trimming branches so the tree can grow stronger. It's then that personality, character, and thought patterns take shape. Every experience, every choice, every human interaction leaves its mark. Adolescence is a storm in the brain, literally. The limbic system, the center of emotion, works at full power, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic and planning, is still developing. That's why teenagers can laugh one moment and slam doors the next. Their brains are emotional laboratories, learning balance. But it's also the time when creativity peaks, because where there is chaos, new ideas are born. The adult brain stabilizes, but never stops changing. Once we thought neurons only died with age. Now we know that's false. The brain creates new cells even in adulthood, especially in the hippocampus, the seat of memory. And though it no longer grows explosively, it keeps rebuilding itself. This is neuroplasticity, the ability to adapt. Every new experience, every skill learned, every conversation, even taking a different route to work, changes your brain. Literally. New connections form, old ones strengthen or fade. The brain isn't a library of finished books. It's an editor, rewriting the story of your life every day. When you learn, you create pathways. The more often you use them, the stronger they become. That's why musicians can play with their eyes closed, and drivers don't think about every turn of the wheel. Their brains have turned knowledge into habit. And that's also why it's so hard to break bad habits. Those are the same well-worn paths that must be overgrown before new ones can form. With age, the brain slows down, but it doesn't lose potential. An older mind may process information more slowly, but it's richer in connections, associations, and experience. It's like an old library, maybe without fast internet, but filled with wisdom. And if kept in use, it can be astonishingly agile. A fun fact: people who regularly learn new things, languages, instruments, even small skills, literally slow down brain aging. They keep their connections flexible, because a bored brain wilts, a curious brain blooms. It's no coincidence we say we are what we think. That's not just philosophy, it's biology. Thoughts are impulses that shape connections. If you dwell on negativity, your brain adapts to it. If you cultivate calm, gratitude, curiosity, you build an entirely different neural network. In this sense, each of us literally sculpts our brain day by day. This can even be seen in scans. Monks who've meditated for years have thicker regions in the cortex responsible for empathy and focus. London taxi drivers, who memorize the city's labyrinth of streets, have enlarged hippocampi. It's proof that the brain isn't a finished work, but a project in constant construction. And what happens at the end of this road? Does the brain age like the body? Yes, but its death isn't the end of everything it created. Because memories, emotions, and the influence we've had on others, these traces remain beyond the brain itself. Every thought, word, and decision created ripples that reached others. And though neurons may one day fall silent, the echo of who we were continues to live in other minds. They drive most of the decisions we like to call rational. You think you decide with reason, but in truth, it's the emotional brain that chooses first, and logic only follows, explaining the choice. Every "I feel this is right" is really a signal from deep within the limbic system, one of the oldest parts of the brain. That's where emotions are born. In the amygdala, hippocampus, hypothalamus. These are structures that existed long before humans learned to speak. Emotions were the language the brain used before words existed. When you feel fear, the amygdala acts like an alarm, triggering the fight or flight response. Your heart races, pupils dilate, blood flows from the stomach to the muscles, and remarkably, this happens before you even think the words, "I'm afraid." The brain reacts before consciousness catches up. Joy, awe, gratitude. Those are signals that the world is safe, that it's worth engaging. It's an evolutionary motivation system. But the brain doesn't just react, it learns emotions. A child isn't born afraid of spiders. That fear forms after seeing others react. Emotions, then, are like a language. We learn them from those around us. Then comes love, the most complex emotion of all. Love isn't really a feeling. It's a biochemical state of mind, a fusion of drug-like euphoria and the obsession of compulsive thought. When you fall in love, your brain releases a powerful cocktail of dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and noradrenaline. Dopamine brings euphoria. That's why lovers can't sleep, forget to eat, and think of nothing but the person they love. Serotonin levels drop, which is why they become obsessive. It's the same mechanism seen in obsessive-compulsive disorder. Oxytocin and vasopressin create the bond. They're the reason you feel attachment, tenderness, and calm when you're close to someone you love. So love isn't one single emotion. It's a chemical cycle. It begins with infatuation, intense, unpredictable, driven by dopamine. Then comes attachment, stable, warm, grounded in oxytocin and trust. And finally, closeness. When love stops being a fire and becomes a steady warmth. The brain reacts to touch in extraordinary ways. When someone close to you hugs you, your heart rate drops, and your level of cortisol, the stress hormone, decreases. Just 20 seconds of hugging is enough for your brain to release oxytocin. That's why affection is so important. It's the biological language of safety. But the brain can also be mistaken. For example, when you're scared and there's an attractive person nearby, the brain can confuse fear with falling in love. It's called the bridge effect. People crossing a dangerous bridge are more likely to fall in love with the person they meet on it. They don't realize it's not love, but adrenaline. Emotions are also memory. The hippocampus records memories, but emotions decide which ones survive. That's why you remember your first kiss, but not what you ate a week ago. Strong emotions literally burn a trace into the brain. That's why trauma lingers for so long. The brain learns it too well. Falling in love can be as addictive as a drug. Brain scans show that people in love and people addicted to cocaine activate the same areas of the reward system. Love literally gets high on dopamine. That's why heartbreak hurts physically. It's withdrawal. The brain is suffering from a lack of its dose of another person. Yet love can also heal. Touch, closeness, tenderness activate the parasympathetic nervous system, lowering stress, calming the heartbeat, steadying the breath. People in supportive relationships statistically live longer and have stronger immune systems. So love isn't poetry. It's an evolutionary survival system, and yet, even if we can explain it all with chemistry, we still can't manufacture it. You can't inject someone with love, even though we know every neurotransmitter involved. Because the brain isn't just a lab, it's also a theater. The brain is a remarkably delicate machine. It controls everything: thoughts, emotions, decisions, even how you see the world. But its greatest secret is that it can be deceived. Sometimes all it takes is an emotion, a melody, or love itself. And sometimes, something that alters its chemistry in a more direct way. When we talk about being under the influence, most people think of substances. But in truth, every one of us is under the influence of hormones, moods, memories, laughter, stress, notifications on our phones. The brain reacts not only to what enters from the outside, but to what it produces on its own. When someone takes something that changes their state, the brain reacts as if it received a strong reward signal. The dopamine system lights up, the same one that governs joy, satisfaction, and pleasure. It's like flooring the gas pedal. The whole system speeds up. The problem is, if you do it too often, the engine begins to overheat. Some stimulants cause a rapid surge of dopamine. The effect is immediate. The brain says, "That felt great. I want more." But after the high comes silence. Dopamine levels drop below normal, and the world loses its color. That's why people chasing chemical boosts of happiness often feel empty and dull afterward. It's not punishment. It's biology trying to restore balance. On the other hand, sedatives act like someone dimming the lights in a room. The brain relaxes, but it also slows down. Some areas shut off faster than others, especially those responsible for logic and self-control. That's why people in such states feel braver, more confident, more talkative. Not because they've changed, but because the inner guard that says, "Don't do that," has fallen asleep. Fun fact, when scientists scanned the brains of people deeply in love, they looked almost identical to those of people under strong stimulants. Falling in love is a natural, legal way of stimulating the reward system. The pure, biological high of love. But here's the most fascinating part. The brain can produce its own consciousness-altering substances. During intense laughter, meditation, running, or dancing, it releases endorphins, natural painkillers that bring bliss and euphoria. That's why after a good workout, you feel like you're on something more. It's called the runner's high. The brain can reward itself, if you motivate it to. And it's not just chemistry that can alter awareness. Technology can be addictive too. Every notification, every like, every new video delivers a tiny dopamine hit. Every time something surprises you, the brain says, "That was worth waiting for." Over time, you start craving not the content, but the feeling of anticipation itself. That's why it's so hard to put the phone down. It's not about willpower, it's about biology. Studies show that having your attention interrupted every few minutes, like by notifications, lowers focus as much as sleep deprivation. The brain simply can't keep up with the switching. That's why you feel exhausted in the evening even when you've done nothing. Certain sounds, smells, and lights can also affect brain waves. For example, fast beats and strobe lights can synchronize your brain rhythms, putting you into a semi-hypnotic trance. That's why concerts, dancing, and rituals have worked the same way for thousands of years, uniting people through a shared rhythm. And here's a twist. Your thoughts can literally change your brain chemistry. When you meditate, pray, or simply breathe calmly, your levels of dopamine and serotonin shift. You don't need any external substance to feel peace. Your brain carries its own pharmacy, ready to be used, if you let it. But the most astonishing part is that even expectation can act like experience itself. If you believe something will help you, your brain starts behaving as if it already has. That's the placebo effect. Belief alone can trigger the release of chemicals that reduce pain or stress. A thought can spark a biochemical reaction as real as any drug. Does that mean we're controlled by chemistry? Not quite. It means we have more influence over it than we think. You can consciously change your brain's state through breathing, movement, music, gratitude, connection. The brain isn't a victim of chemistry. It's a brilliant system capable of creating its own medicine, if you learn how to use it. The brain lies every day, and it does it so convincingly that you never suspect you're the victim of your own illusions. It's not malice, it's survival. If you saw and heard the world exactly as it is, chaotic, random, full of noise, you'd go mad. So the brain filters, simplifies, fills in the blanks. It creates a version of reality that makes sense, but it's only an interpretation. Your eyes don't see everything, they only see light. Your ears don't hear everything, they capture vibrations in air. The rest is done by your brain. It adds color, shape, and meaning. Seeing isn't passive, it's creative. That's why two people can look at the same image and see completely different things. The brain literally fills in the gaps. When you read a familiar word with letters scrambled inside, you still understand it. Because the brain doesn't read letter by letter. It recognizes patterns. It sees what it expects to see. Vision is the greatest illusionist. Example? Optical illusions. Lines that appear bent but are straight. Colors that seem to change just because another hue sits beside them. A hollow mask that your brain insists is a normal face. That's because your brain has a rule written deep inside. Faces are convex, so it corrects what it sees to fit the expectation. The brain doesn't show you the truth, only its version of truth. But the illusions don't stop with sight. Your sense of touch, hearing, even balance can lie too. Know the rubber hand illusion? If you hide your real hand and someone strokes both a fake hand and your hidden one at the same time, after a moment, you feel like the rubber hand is yours. Your brain simply decides that where you see and feel touch, that's your body, and it believes it. The same happens with phantom pain, one of neurology's great mysteries. People who've lost a limb can still feel it itching, burning, or clenching. Because although the limb is gone, its map in the brain remains. The brain hasn't forgotten it existed. For the brain, it's still there. Some doctors help such patients with mirrors, showing the reflection of the healthy hand so the brain believes the missing one is moving. And it often works. A single glance can trick pain. In fact, pain itself is an illusion. It doesn't exist outside the brain. When you cut yourself, it's not the wound that hurts. It's your brain deciding how much suffering you should feel. Sometimes it exaggerates, sometimes it ignores. People in shock can have serious injuries and feel no pain at all. Others, with no physical cause, feel agony because their brain is caught in a loop. The brain decides what's real. One of the most fascinating of its deceptions are dreams. In dreams, we feel fear, joy, even pain, though nothing is happening in reality. The brain builds a whole world, and we believe every rule it invents. In dreams, you can fly, meet the dead, smell and taste things that don't exist. And it all feels so convincing that only after waking do you realize it was a projection. But for the brain, there's no difference. It reacts to dreams as if they were real. The heart races, muscles tense, stress hormones surge. A dream is theater inside your head, where you are both actor and director. The brain doesn't just create illusions, it needs them. If we were fully aware of everything around us, we couldn't function. So it filters reality, arranges it into stories we can understand. That's why memory, too, is an illusion. It's not a recording. It's a story you keep rewriting. Each time you recall something, your memory changes slightly. Scientists say memory is like a file you open and save again, with edits. Years later, it might have little to do with what actually happened, but you'll still swear you remember it exactly. The brain can even trick time itself. In stress, seconds stretch. In joy, they collapse. Emotion-laden moments feel longer, though they lasted only an instant. Time in the brain isn't steady. It's elastic. It stretches and contracts like rubber. That's why moments of pain feel endless, and good ones flash by in the blink of an eye. And now, one of the most surprising illusions of all, the feeling of self. That sense of being you, of having a single, coherent identity, that too is a construction of the brain. In truth, your consciousness is a network of countless processes scattered across different regions of your mind, all working together and exchanging information so quickly that it feels as if there's one unified someone inside. But that someone can't actually be pointed to. There's no command center. The brain is like an orchestra without a conductor, and yet it plays with such harmony that you've come to believe there must be one. And maybe that's the greatest illusion of all. The belief that you control your mind when in fact, it's the mind that controls you. But maybe there's no need to fight that. Maybe it's enough to understand that every emotion, every memory, every pain, every dream, they're all just waves of electricity and chemistry dancing in the dark. And yet, from that darkness, an entire life is born. Now, let's move to things that sound almost impossible. There are people who can live nearly normal lives even after losing an entire half of their brain. The remaining hemisphere simply takes over the missing functions. Some scientists have studied patients who were missing their cerebellum, the part responsible for coordination, and yet, after years of training, these people could walk, run, even play instruments. The brain had quietly rerouted itself, building new neural pathways. There are individuals with extraordinary memory who can recall whole books or days from decades ago in stunning detail. Their minds operate like supercomputers, though no one truly understands what enables such hyper-optimization. Some people seem to feel events before they happen, or experience the emotions of others so strongly that they react before the other person even moves. The effect of mirror neurons and the brain's social sensitivity. And in those with savant syndrome, incredible musical, mathematical, or artistic abilities sometimes emerge after brain injuries that, for most, would mean disability. The brain, in those cases, reorganizes itself in ways no one could predict. The brain can also create astonishing real-time illusions. In experiments, people have felt warmth, cold, or even the taste of something they weren't actually touching or eating, just by seeing it simulated. In virtual reality, some epileptic patients experience vivid visions during seizures, hearing music that doesn't exist, feeling as if they're floating, or seeing light and color that aren't really there. In sensory deprivation, in total darkness, silence or isolation, the brain itself begins to hallucinate, creating images and sounds to fill the void, as if it needs perception to survive. And then there's synesthesia, a condition where people see sounds, hear colors, or taste emotions. Their senses intertwine in ways most of us can't even imagine. Their world is a living mosaic of blended perception. Some people, after trauma, suddenly develop new perceptual skills, as if the brain compensates for what's lost. Blind individuals learn to sense obstacles using sound and vibration. Deaf people become remarkably adept at reading faces and gestures, picking up emotions with uncanny accuracy. And in dreams, or through imagination, the brain can replay experiences that never actually happened. In certain experiments, participants remembered entire false memories planted by researchers, believing them to be real, and their brains reacted exactly as if those events had truly occurred. Time, inside the brain, also refuses to behave normally. In moments of crisis, Seconds can stretch into hours. In deep focus or flow, hours can collapse into what feels like a few fleeting moments. It all depends on how the brain synchronizes memory, emotion, and perception. People in deep meditation can slow their brainwaves so profoundly that time and body seem to vanish, leaving only pure awareness, suspended beyond moments and measure. Even more extraordinary, the brain can learn in its sleep. Studies show that motor skills can improve, and mathematical problems can be solved after the brain processes information overnight, without conscious effort. Other experiments have shown that dreams can be partially programmed using certain sounds or scents, and the brain responds as if the events were truly happening in the real world. Finally, there's the brain's almost miraculous ability to heal and adapt. Even after strokes, injuries, or years of neglect, the brain can form new connections, repurpose neurons, and rewire entire networks so that a person can return to life, relearn skills, and grow again. All of this shows that the brain isn't just a biological organ. It's a living, creative, ever-changing system filled with mystery, illusion, and near-impossible potential. The brain makes mistakes every day, sometimes funny, sometimes baffling, sometimes terrifying. Picture this. You reach for a hot cup of coffee, but it's cooled down, and yet your hand still jerks back. Your muscles tighten and your brain screams, "Too hot!" Why? Because it expects the heat. The brain doesn't simply record reality like a camera. It predicts it, based on past experience. And sometimes those predictions fail, like when you step onto what looks like a solid floor, and suddenly you slip. Your body reacts before your mind even understands what's happening. Every second, your brain is forecasting, interpreting, correcting, and those forecasts don't always match the truth. The same happens with motion, sound, or balance. People can feel movement or weight changes in objects that haven't actually moved or shifted because their brain interprets subtle cues and anticipates change before it happens. There's even an illusion called the rubber hand effect when your real hand is hidden and a fake one is stroked in sync with your sense of touch. Your brain adopts it as part of your body. You feel ownership of something that isn't even you. The brain's errors extend to sight and sound, too. You might hear sounds that don't exist or see motion in stillness. In a dark room, your brain may interpret faint changes in light as movement, creating the illusion that someone's there when no one is. And in music, your mind fills in missing notes, completing melodies that were never actually played, and reacts emotionally as if they were. Even in simple touch, when you hold something with your eyes closed, the brain can misjudge its weight, temperature, or shape, trying to predict what it should feel like. These perceptual mistakes actually make the world feel more stable and continuous, even if it isn't always accurate. Some illusions can be extreme. In virtual reality or psychological experiments, people have felt as though they were standing at the edge of a cliff, their hearts racing, muscles tensing, even though the ground beneath them was perfectly safe. In those moments, the brain commits fully to its imagined reality, and the body follows. It can also misinterpret movement. When we track fast-moving objects, the brain sometimes predicts motion incorrectly, causing delayed or exaggerated physical responses. That's why athletes train coordination so intensely. They're teaching their brains to anticipate their own errors. You experience it too, stepping onto what seems like dry pavement in winter only to slip on hidden ice. Your brain assumed traction. Your body learned otherwise. All of this reminds us that our experience of the world is not reality itself. It's a story the brain builds, a simulation constantly rewritten, revised, and sometimes completely wrong. And those mistakes aren't flaws. They're part of the brain's brilliance. They help us survive, react instantly, and weave a coherent narrative of life, even when the facts don't quite match our perception. But it's not only the human brain that astonishes. Animal minds hold their own wonders. Dolphins recognize themselves in mirrors. communicate through complex vocal patterns, and solve problems requiring foresight, suggesting not just intelligence, but awareness. Elephants remember water sources for decades and show empathy, comforting others in distress, even mourning their dead. Their emotional responses are tied to brain regions remarkably similar to ours. Birds, crows, ravens, parrots can solve puzzles, use tools, and even plan multi-step sequences, anticipating the actions of others. Wolves coordinate sophisticated group hunts. Chimpanzees communicate through gestures and facial expressions, manipulating or teaching one another. Even some fish and insects can learn by watching, something once thought to be uniquely mammalian. Octopuses, with their strange, distributed intelligence, push the limits of what a mind can be. Each arm holds clusters of neurons that can act semi-independently, solving problems and manipulating objects without direct orders from the central brain. In the oceans, blue whales, with some of the largest brains on Earth, communicate across vast distances using ultra-low frequencies. Bats, through echolocation, process torrents of spatial data in real time, navigating with astonishing precision. Migratory birds like pigeons and swallows travel across continents. Guided by memory and Earth's magnetic fields, their brains seamlessly blending senses into a perfect internal compass. Some animal minds seem almost magical. Crows can plan several steps ahead, combining tools in creative ways. Elephants recognize their own reflections and express grief. Octopuses open jars and escape mazes with ease. Even bees communicate through intricate dance languages, describing direction and distance of flowers to their hive mates. Looking across all of nature, it becomes clear intelligence and perception have no single form. They can be centralized, distributed, specialized, or entirely alien. Yet each works in its own perfect way to solve the challenges of life. The brain, it seems, is one of nature's greatest inventions. Endlessly diverse, endlessly surprising, and capable of evoking a genuine wow. The history of healing the brain is just as fascinating, and at times, disturbing. A century ago, doctors searching for ways to treat depression, schizophrenia, or aggression resorted to methods that now seem brutal. Lobotomy was one of them, cutting the connections between the frontal lobes and the rest of the brain, under the belief that it would switch off unwanted emotions or behaviors. The results were often tragic. Patients lost spontaneity, emotion, sometimes even basic functionality. Their personalities were changed forever. And yet in the 1940s and 50s, lobotomies were performed by the thousands, seen as the only hope in the face of unbearable suffering and limited alternatives. At the same time, electroshock therapy emerged, today remembered mostly through grim movie scenes. But back then, it was a genuine attempt to treat severe depression. Patients sometimes experienced memory loss or confusion, but for some, it truly helped, revealing that the brain could respond to electricity in surprisingly healing ways. Over time, medicine grew more precise. Deep brain stimulation, or DBS, now allows surgeons to place electrodes within specific brain structures, modulating neural signals in conditions like Parkinson's, depression, or OCD. The effects can be remarkable. Trembling hands steady, mood stabilize. People regain their lives. It's proof that the brain can be tuned, but it demands near superhuman precision. A millimeter off, and the results can change entirely. Pharmacology is another way science learns to heal the brain. Psychotropic drugs that modulate dopamine, serotonin, or acetylcholine can radically change perception, emotions, and cognitive function. A small chemical shift in the brain can lift someone out of depression, bring joy, or improve social functioning. It's fascinating that experiences which feel so tangible and personal often depend on subtle changes in neural networks and neurotransmitters. Today, science goes even further. Brain-computer interfaces can read neural signals and translate them into prosthetic movements or machine control. Artificial intelligence combined with neurons explores cognitive enhancement, and gene therapies open the door to modifying the brain structure itself. While this sounds like science fiction, experiments suggest that in the future, it may be possible not only to treat disease, but to enhance cognition, modulate emotions, and even create new ways of thinking. At the same time, these possibilities raise ethical questions. Where does therapy end and personality manipulation begin? Memory is one of the brain's most fascinating and deceptive features. It doesn't store memories like a computer file that can be perfectly replayed. Instead, the brain reconstructs them every time we recall, mixing, reshaping, and enriching them with its own interpretations. Sometimes we remember events that never happened, or add details we never experienced, because the brain fills gaps to create a coherent narrative. Experiments have shown that people can be convinced that entirely fabricated childhood events actually occurred, and their brains respond to these memories as if they were real. The emotions evoked are indistinguishable from authentic experiences. Emotions play a central role in memory. Strong feelings like fear, joy, or sadness strengthen neural connections, making memories more durable. That's why dramatic events, from a first kiss to a serious accident, persist for decades, while everyday neutral moments fade quickly. The brain treats emotion as a marker of significance. The stronger the emotional reaction, the more powerfully the memory is encoded, yet also more filtered, transformed, and interpreted through later experiences and beliefs. Some studies even show memory's creativity. When recalling, the brain can combine fragments of different events to form new images that feel real. This explains why sometimes we remember exactly something that is actually a blend of experiences and suggestions. Memories are not passive data stores. The brain actively processes them depending on context, mood, and purpose, subtly altering them each time they are recalled. Extreme cases highlight memory's plasticity and unreliability. People with hyperthymesia can recite entire books or days from decades ago in stunning detail, yet even they experience distortions, false details, or misordered timelines because the brain interprets rather than simply reproduces information. Conversely, those with brain injuries or neurodegenerative disease may forget details, yet the brain fills in gaps with fragments that fit the story, creating the illusion of continuity. Memory is thus a dynamic, creative process intimately tied to our emotions. What we remember is not just a snapshot of the past, but also a reflection of how the brain perceives our history, values experiences, and assigns emotions. Every memory is simultaneously true and false, emotionally authentic and real to our consciousness, yet inaccurate in factual detail. It is this unpredictability, plasticity, and creative power that makes the brain nature's most fascinating laboratory, where past, present, and imagination constantly merge, shaping the story of our lives in ever-changing form.